right. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for joining the conference. I hope you are having a good day. We certainly are. So thanks so much for sticking with us. Thanks so much for coming to this session. It's going to be a great session, I'm sure. I've seen Charlotte speak before, and I can guarantee you it's going to be an entertaining and advice-packed session coming up. So what am I doing here? Well, I'm Tom. I work from English UK, so I thank you all for joining the event. And I also have to do a quick bit of housekeeping on how the session's going to run. So the first thing is to say that English UK puts this event on, and we wouldn't be able to put it on without the help of our sponsors, who are very much valued, and their support is really important to everything we do. So thank you so much to Ensley Insurance, Cambridge Assessment English, Macmillan Education, Language Cert, and Trinity College London for helping us to put this event on. And we've been able to make it free. We've got people from all over the world joining, so give us a quick message in the chat box. Let us know where you're coming in from. That's always interesting to know. We will be doing questions. So if you do have any questions for Charlotte, please put them in your Q&A box, and we'll come to those at the end of the session. So if you do have a question, write it in the Q&A box, and we'll come to those at the end. The other thing to say, just the last thing, is if the worst should happen and the session drops out, give us a minute and then rejoin on the same link that you used to join this session. So give us a minute and then just rejoin using the same links, and we will have it back up and running for you. Okay, right, that's me done. So Charlotte, thanks so much for coming along to talk about this. I will stop sharing my screen and I will disappear and hand over to you. So I'll see you in a bit.
Fab. Brilliant. Cool. So hi everyone, my name is Charlotte Williams and welcome to my session today. For those of you who haven't seen me talk before, I'm an EFL teacher. I'm also an inclusion and diversity advisor, and I'm currently a BBC Learning English producer. So welcome to my session. Just going to share my screen. Right, so there we go. So as you can see, my session is called Oh Crumbs, How Do I Deal With That? Diversity and Inclusion in an Ever-Changing World. So in our classrooms, I think that we can safely say that at some point throughout our careers, something has been raised in the classroom and you've thought, oh, crumbs, how do I deal with that? Maybe we feel like we're not prepared. Maybe we're scared of insulting someone, or maybe we're trying to protect someone from being insulted. But without the appropriate tools and without the appropriate preparation, it's really difficult to move forward. So this session attempts to isolate modern day diversity and inclusion problems in the classroom, and then talk about the barriers that we have to being the inclusive individuals that we want to be, and then suggest different techniques from psychological theories that might be useful to different working materials that you can use in your classroom. It's also worth me saying that today, everything that you see is going to be downloadable or accessible after the session. So I'm really keen for all of my materials to be accessed and shared by as many people as possible. I'm not precious about it. I just want to get the word out. So right at the end, you'll find all my contact details. Don't hesitate to contact me for anything. So in this session, we're going to start off by talking about how far we've come, a little review. So since my last talk at English UK last year, the world is a completely different place. And it's definitely worth looking at the highs and the lows of what the pandemic has brought to the world. Next, we'll discuss the barriers to us being the inclusive individuals that we want to be in our classroom and educational space, and how we overcome them, leading into practical solutions and suggestions, useful materials, resources and websites that you can use. And then finally, I'll answer any questions that you guys have. So starting off, with what I discussed last year. I came into my session last year fully armed with talking extensively about why we should be more inclusive in our classroom practice. I'm going to very briefly go over that now and then focus on what the world looks like today. So starting off linguistically, both Mers and Elmer Toohey in 2017 and 16 respectively spoke about linguistic stunting and how if you're not including people in the narratives, they won't learn as successfully because they won't see themselves involved in the language. Matui also spoke about how structurally you need to teach people language for insult versus opinion and talk about things they might not understand or agree with for their language to grow and develop. Sayer in 2005 spoke about how erasure is psychologically damaging. When you don't see your narrative demonstrated in front of you in your media and your education, you get psychologically and negatively affected. So in a safeguarding capacity, it's our duty. Gray spoke about morals with cultural integration and how we have morals to do something about ensuring that our students feel safe and happy and included. It also already comes up. In classrooms, you know that someone's always going to say something. People are intrigued, they want to learn. And if we don't address it, then we are censoring, you could argue. And finally, personal. As a teacher, it's really important for me that my identity and the identity of my students aren't erased. But I think that how inclusion and diversity and EDI in general have come on in the last year, I'm not sure if I need to be listing these things. Looking at how far we've come with the Black Lives Matter movement, Time's Up, Our Bodies, Our Streets coming from the Sarah Everard tragedy, Me Too accelerating, and the intersectionality of all of our practice, lots of really amazing movement in a forward manner has been made over the last year. People are having their voices heard like never before. And in some ways, that is just the most exciting thing. In addition, webinars and conference schedules look so different to how they did 5 years ago. And EDI is clearly right at the forefront of what we are trying to do as we speak. However, it's not all fun and games, unfortunately. So this was a study that Clayton did for the NHS. I think that was a Manchester NHS service in 2021. So it was this year. And tragically, still 52% of LGBT people report self-harming in comparison with 35% of cis straight people. 44% of LGBT people reported suicidal thoughts, and 13% of LGBT people in the ages range of 18 to 24 have attempted to take their own life in the last year. In addition, Stonewall did a piece of work on this, and they said in many cases, this is related to the fact that they feel isolated by a school culture which excuses the use of homophobic language. So although these issues can seem wider, they're very much an issue for us as teachers and educators in a classroom. This is the safeguarding, this is the safety of our students and their mental health that we're looking at. And sadly, despite so many narratives being heard in ways that they never have been before, we've still got a lot of, if not the work to do. In addition, COVID-19, as we all know, has negatively affected minority cultures and people of colour far disproportionately to others. And again, bringing that narrative into the classroom and being mindful of the fact that everyone hasn't experienced the pandemic in the same way, especially people of Asian background. In a article by the Oxford University Press, Mida, I think a month ago, spoke about how in New York City, Asian racially motivated crimes against Asian people have increased tenfold. And as always, everything that happens in the outside world gets brought into our classrooms. We will be experiencing more racism, more homophobia, more prejudice in general. And so it's really important that we focus on dealing with that in a practical and realistic way. Now, obviously, we all want to be inclusive, and we all want to have as diverse a narrative as possible to make everyone feel comfortable, but it's not always that easy. And so in the next section, I'm going to be talking about the things that stop us being the teachers that often we want to be. So, barriers. There are three main barriers that we're going to talk about today. The first one, as represented by Sad Dog, is internal insecurity. The next one is practical issues. And when I say practical issues, I mean access to materials, querying your materials, making sure that you include diverse religious and racial narratives, and also how you can use your textbooks in the most diverse way possible, because as we all know, they're still not as representative as we would like them to be. And finally, lack of structural support, which is something that I'm really going to hammer home today because I think it's absolutely essential. So with regards to internal insecurity, often it's so challenging being sat in a classroom, hearing something prejudiced and not knowing how you're going to deal with it. So this goal versus role theory is a theory to deal with microaggressions that I found a while ago by a person called Bird. And I think it's beautiful because it's very incorporative of everyone's diversities and everyone's emotional capacity at the time. There's only so much that we can do on different days. And rather than resisting that, we should embrace that in a way that means that we can maximize our output to our best ability. So firstly, decide what your goal is. What do you want to achieve by any conversation that you have with prejudice that you face in the classroom? What do you want your end goal to be? And then next, decide what your role is. As a teacher, what do you think you should be achieving? So as teachers, we all have different roles in our heads of what we think an educator should be. Some of us are more politically motivated, some of us are more student focused, and some of us just want to do the grammar and go home. And all of those are absolutely fine, but yet different ways of being teachers. So having an idea of who you are as a teacher and what you want to achieve by confronting prejudice is the cornerstones or the foundation of then being able to deal with it. And then the final thing is choosing whichever of the following techniques feels appropriate or doable. So on the left-hand side, there are different approaches that you can take. Do you want to appeal to values? Do you want to express your feelings? What do you want to do that day? And as I said, be really mindful. How do you feel that day? Do you feel like you've got the strength to really launch into a conversation about structural issues? Or do you feel like you just need to address it and then move on? This will vary for every teacher every day, and that's okay. So if you want to appeal to values, you can say maybe, how would you feel if someone said that? Or if you've got a lovely, hilarious class who love to lol and laugh around, then maybe use humor. Maybe say, oh, that's something my granddad would say. As I said, all of the resources in today's presentation can all be downloaded, or you can contact me and I'm happy to share anything with you. Because as I said, I just want to get the word out as much as I can. So practically, integration is key, as I'm sure you've heard a million times, but rather than just doing one lesson on one variety, whether you'll be doing one narrative, whether you're doing Ramadan or an LGBT issue or Black History Month, rather than doing one chunk of often CLIL orientated lesson, integrating these different narratives into different levels is essential. Now, before I move on, I want to make it really clear that in my previous role at my school before COVID hit, I was the LGBTQI+ advisor. And since then, I'm really trying to focus on diversifying my range with inclusion and diversity. Prejudice is prejudice, no matter what form it takes. But just to make it clear that if the majority of my materials are skewed a little bit towards LGBT, that's why. So, firstly, McDonald says start with the basics. Pronoun use. So she spoke about how even when you've got an A0, even when you've got a beginner, you can still start incorporating things with pronouns rather than just she and he. Why not she, he, they? Integrated activities with grammar. So in your present continuous examples, you could say Susie and Jane are getting married. Voices re-record and listenings, you can re-record in different languages, different accents. CLIL, history and culture. Obviously, as I said, you can incorporate those languages into like structured big reading lessons or speaking lessons or vocabulary lessons if you'd like, but that needs to be under the umbrella of all of the other integration as well. As I said, integrated activities. Diverse images are such a great way of making people feel included in the class. If you have a visual representation, that person will feel included and heard. And also, Elma Tui spoke about language for opinion rather than insult, as I touched on earlier on. So rather than have your students say, oh, for me, teacher, that's bad, educate linguistically around the aspects of, in my country, that's uncommon, or in my country, that practice isn't okay, or softening the language in a culturally sensitive way. So as you can see here, please do excuse the fact that this looks like it was drawn by a 3-year-old. You have no idea how many times I redrew this, and I've tried to make it look beautiful, but here we are. So as you can see, this is my family tree. On the left-hand side, I have the gender non-specific word partner for someone's partner, and also divorce. And then underneath, I have included queer narratives in my family tree. So the whole lesson doesn't need to be about these queer narratives, or this whole lesson doesn't need to be about including people with different gender pronouns, abilities. It can just be included in small ways. These are larger, more structured skills-based lessons. So we have Freddie Mercury on the left, and we have Pride, which I actually created for Brighton Pride on the right-hand side. And as I said, again, if you want any of my materials, you're welcome to them. Just email me, ask me. This was a DogMe based lesson that one of my fellow teachers did. He gave it to a CAE class, and they were just eliciting the language that pre-existed and learning together about how to use correct language when talking about LGBT issues. However, it's all very well for me to talk about how great it is to be creating your own resources and like thinking about how to integrate it day by day. The real world as a teacher, as we all know, isn't that simple. We don't have hours and hours to create our resources. So for the, say for the more time discerning amongst us, I have some websites here that I found that seem great. So Twinkle is fab. It is for mainstream English kids. It does go up to Key Stage 4, but their Black History Month stuff was wicked, and their religious inclusion stuff was super good. There were loads of lovely posters to use, loads of materials to exploit, lovely stuff. LGBT plus History Month has great resources for schooling, but also for LGBT History Month. Sensations English is a really excellent new diverse resource. I do think you have to pay for it, but it is absolutely smashing. There's a new course book called Raise Up for ELT that is absolutely brilliant and very, very inclusive and really, really fab. So I would suggest that. And also Fluentize. I saw some really lovely inclusive resources there. If you're looking to go more down the LGBT route, you could lobby your management into becoming a Stonewall ambassador for your company. It's quite expensive, and I had my ideals set on it before COVID, but it's a really, really wonderful program that encourages individuals to take the Stonewall values back to their schools. Which brings me on to structural support. Now, this is represented with this lovely, lovely picture of a manager high-fiving their employee. I would like to note, though, when I downloaded this picture, I, in my head, automatically assumed that the man was the manager and the woman was the employee, which for an inclusivity and diversity advisor is quite extreme, but I think it shows just how ingrained these things are in our minds and how we have to check it so constantly. But yeah, they're sharing a lovely high five, as you can see. Their relationship is excellent. So with structural support, we have Barakat and al. In 2021 talking about how culturally competent leaders positively affect school environments, which in turn fosters equitable learning. Comes from the top, works its way down. In Chia's plenary, she spoke about how when she faced racism in the classroom, when she got supported by management, she felt like she could continue more comfortably in that position. And so did Silvana. She was speaking about calling out discriminatory practices and having that in a management capacity and a structural capacity. So previously, I've focused quite a lot on the psychology of being inclusive, but it's not that simple. You can't continue to be inclusive in the way that you want to in the classroom unless you have your managers there having your back, unless you know that if something happens, you can turn around to them and be like, hey, support me here. Because it can't just be a one-man island situation. It has to be company-wide. So again, I cannot intensely say this enough, lobby your superiors. When I first started at my previous school, it took around 7 or 8 years for me to create my role and get it instilled as the inclusivity and diversity advisor. And then we were going company-wide, but it took a long time. I have a feeling now, with so many companies having EDI representation, it won't be the same anymore. I think it will be a lot easier, but lobby them. If they are not being as active as they need to be, then lobby them. You need an EDI representative, equalities, diversity and inclusion. You need EDI representation going through your school and educational spaces so your students know that they're safe and heard. You need CPD. One session with me isn't going to be enough to tell people comfortably how to go into classrooms and be inclusive. Constant professional development, consistent professional development, and the other one, CPD, is what you need. Support system. You need to have a support system around you, whether that be other teachers or whether that be management as well. You need to feel safe, especially for people who are in minority groups of their own. Dealing with these things in the classroom can be really challenging, personally and professionally. Support is essential to be able to do it. Same with company-wide policy. It needs to be integrated all the way through the company. No tokenism, actual real diversity company-wide. And that transfers into an HR policy as well. So this is what the policy at St Giles looked like. As I said, please forgive the lack of diversity here in that it's only LGBT based. That is because I was currently the LGBT advisor. But I think that all of these theories and all of these practical steps could be transferred to any diversity, whether that be from an ableist perspective, a racist perspective, an ageist perspective, or a neurodiverse perspective. I think these things would be useful. So it started off with a discussion in class. So firstly, if you feel able and comfortable as a teacher, you would start by addressing the prejudice in class, maybe using the goal versus role theory, if that sits comfortably with you. And then if that's not enough, a discussion after class with the student on the next prejudicial event, if you have one. And then the next elevation is to the director of studies, and then the next one is to the principal. Now, obviously, this seems quite obvious. That's just the level of disciplining that you would have with any standard procedural event. But knowing that my management supported this and that they would hold true to this meant that I felt safer and more comfortable in my classroom going forward with these things. We had these up in the classrooms, my glowing face, with different contact details for me and the available services that I offered as an LGBT advisor. I would like to say, as an LGBT advisor, one of the things I struggled with the most was keeping myself as a springboard rather than as a mentor or a counselor. I'm not trained, but there are so many people that are. So I very much kept myself as kind of like a mini Google or a information service that was a springboard to other more trained services than myself. But I often found that challenging because the stories from some of the students are harrowing, and you want to be present, but at the same time you want to protect them and yourself. So it can be challenging. Put structures in before you do anything to make sure you're safe, and they are too. So this is what the LGBT board looked like. And as I said, if COVID hadn't have happened and I was still at St. Giles, what I would try and do is diversify these boards. I would have one for LGBT issues. I would have one for neurodiversity. I would have one for kind of different races, nationalities, a religion board. Oh, I'm getting excited. It's not happening. So on the left-hand side, you can see Meet People and Party, which was social events, places to go, meet up groups, and an activity schedule. And then on the right-hand side, there was help and support. Sexual health, very important, not to be ashamed of, needs to be shared. Our students need to be safe. The law. Lots of our students came from places in the world where being gay was illegal. So I wanted to make it really explicit that in the UK, being gay is fine and being homophobic is not. So that was something that got on the board as well. Help in Brighton, places that they could go. And then useful vocabulary. I downloaded Stonewall's glossary of terms and then linguistically graded it for about, it was probably about A2, B1 probably. So people could just open it and look at it and read it and take it away. All of these things I have little copies of. They're not great because unfortunately the file got deleted the other day, but I can definitely send pictures to anyone who would like them. Another thing I would like to mention though is if you get it wrong, don't worry. Like I get it wrong so frequently and I just keep going because you just have to. And I thought I'd show you an example of me getting it wrong. I mean, it's just trash. So on the left-hand side, we have the first poster that I created to aid teachers in being inclusive in the classroom. So the aim of this poster is to go up on the wall in a classroom. And then if you feel like you can't verbally or emotionally deal with prejudice, you can just point to it and then that should end the conversation. So on the left-hand side is the first one that I made. And I mean, this downward face, it almost looks like I'm saying no to these diversities. It's not good. And luckily I went to a teacher focus session, spoke to them and they were like, Charlotte, man, we've got to redo this. So we did. And on the right-hand side is the final poster that we ended up with. At St. Giles, all people are welcome and equal. Very positive, very non-judgmental and quite empathic and peaceful, which was really important. So the last piece of theory or the last kind of structured article that I'd like to talk about is a mixture between Stonewall's and the conversation's steps to inclusion. So Stonewall was talking about how to be more LGBT inclusive and the conversation was talking about how to be more racially inclusive. And this is like a condensed version of their points. So firstly, remember why it's important. Remember, even though we've come a long way, we are still nowhere near where we should be. And unfortunately, in the pandemic, it has also meant that lots of different stories have become persecuted so much more than they ever were before. Spot opportunities for inclusion. Is it Ramadan? Include something. Is there a historical person of color coming up in the story that you could talk about? Is there an LGBT person in the story you could talk about? Your whole lesson doesn't need to become about these narratives, but as long as you're integrating tiny little stories, it'll still make people's voices and stories heard. Support staff and each other. Make sure that your management support you. Can't reiterate that enough. Make sure your fellow teachers support you. Talk about what you're doing together. And share your materials. We all have a tendency to be more engaged with the diversities that we ourselves represent, which is why in this I've been so LGBT inclusive. But lots of my other teacher colleagues have so many of my other teacher colleagues have so many different working materials that we can share, and we can put all the materials together and create really fabulous resources. Celebrate difference. Focus on change, not blame or shame. Often when people bring prejudice comes from cultures, societies, lack of understanding, fear, this. And it's so easy to get swept away with blame and shame. But focusing on empathy and kindness and celebrating difference is a way that I try and move forward. Remain empathic to yourself and remain empathic to others. And remember, some days you'll be like, yeah, totally, I can totally deal with this. And then other ways you'll be like, no, just point to the poster, and that's totally okay. You're still doing as much as you can. Don't do too much, otherwise it might not work. And finally, model your behavior. Model behavior leads to wider change. If in your classroom it's clear that no prejudicial comment will go okay, then the students will go unnoticed and unaddressed, then the students will know that that's not the space where they can bring that attitude to. So make sure as much as you can to consistently model that behavior. So the conclusions are, firstly, progression, which we've had in the last year, isn't completion. We still have a mighty, mighty mountain to climb. Integration is key, not just with materials in the classroom, but throughout the school, throughout the management, throughout the company. Prepare and deal with issues as you can. Have a think about how you'll deal with prejudice. Have a think about how you'll deal with being more inclusive. And that preparation will help you deal with it when it comes up. Structural support is essential. Lobby your management. And finally, mistakes are the good stuff. It's how we learn. We teach our students that all the time. Don't worry if you get it wrong, it means you're learning. And we should do well to remember the same. Thank you so much, guys. If there's anything that you need, you can find me at Charlotte Williams, education.co.uk. Learn Inclusively is my email. That's my really dodgy LinkedIn link. And I'm actually a fully trained celebrant as well. So if you would like an inclusive wedding, you're more than welcome to give me a shout. And my next BBC live lesson is on avoiding sexist language. That's in 2 weeks. So you can see me talk about that on BBC Learning English. We stream live on Facebook or YouTube. I did promise you some Lady Gaga at the end, but I couldn't work out how to get the video to work. So here she is with a lovely quote, being fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. And if you have any questions, I think Tom might be able to help facilitate that.
Hello again. Yes. Wow. Charlotte, thanks so much. What a session. I mean, I did think about giving it a pause just so you can break into Lady Gaga. No, not going to happen.
Maybe not right now.
Not going to happen.
Right
okay, fair enough. No. And also, I mean, not only do we get an amazing presentation, also got a potential wedding organizer planning carrier outer into the bargain. So let me know if there's a discount code for people from this session that I can pass on. No, right. Okay. Joking aside, thank you so much for an absolutely brilliant presentation. I loved it. I mean, so clear and so many great examples, I think, that people in the audience can relate to and use, because that's what we really want. We kind of want to move into like that sort of positive thing you brought out with the poster. Okay, how do we make those changes? And I've really felt that presentation delivered. So whilst we will be able to share the slides, we'll be able to share other details with the attendees. While I'm waiting for questions, don't be shy. I've got a couple myself, actually.
Oh, cool. Tom, very quickly, is my screen? Yes, it is. I'm just trying to, there we go.
Screen is sharing, there we go. So we can send on slides and stuff, but whilst we wait for questions, one from me. I mean, we put together this program. It's not an accident that we've had certain plenaries, certain things foregrounded. And really, you know, English UK, we reflect on the discussions we see and we think maybe we're not doing enough. And this is part, I hope, of us making step changes. I'm really interested. What would you say? Because I can see the list of attendees. You spoke a lot about getting the organization to help you and support you. So what would you say to me and to the attendees that are in that position of being in the association or being in the organizations? What would be your top tips of things we can either do or look out for as we start on this journey?
Okay, so I think moving forward in a management capacity and a teaching capacity with congruence, believing, knowing and understanding what you're doing is the most important thing. I think that often with EDI, general inclusion and diversity, it becomes tokenistic. People are like, oh, we need to be seen to be inclusive. But the key to doing it properly is not to be seen, it's to be understanding why you need to do it. And the key to that is educating oneself to the maximum capacity. So going away and doing managerial courses on why EDI is important, listening to diverse stories, even on a very basic level of like diversifying what you're watching on Netflix. Watch different stories from different races, countries, religions, and LGBT narratives. Educate as much as you possibly can so that throughout your practice, you believe and move forward with congruence in what you're doing. And that'll filter down. That understanding, that knowledge of what is just and what is right will filter down to all of your teachers.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay, we do have a few questions coming in, so keep them coming, audience members, and we'll move through these. So we've got a really fascinating question, which was okay, I'm going to take them slightly out of order. This one is something which I think falls under this, but it's not quite under what we discussed. And this is about student relations. I once had a Saudi student refuse to do a speaking activity with an Israeli student. I didn't want to ignore it, but I didn't know how to deal with it in the best way. He ended up leaving subtly. Any ideas what I could or should have done that? So I appreciate that's slightly outside of what we're talking about here, but I think that's an interesting one about the relationships within the class when we get people together.
I think it's a great question. And I think a lot of this comes down to classroom relations, classroom management, and how you have a safe and happy space for all your students involved. So I think this is a really excellent question to represent that. And it's really difficult. I think a lot of it depends on how, firstly, you're feeling on the day. When I said with goal versus role theory, you need to address what you want as your goal and what you feel like you can do. I really mean that. That's really important. So if you feel like you can engage, you could have opened it up to a conversation, or maybe allow that student to leave, and then next time you see them outside of the classroom, have a small conversation and have a poster or something structural behind you that says, in this institution, unfortunately, in this institution, we don't discriminate against other people. So in a classroom environment, you can't choose who you want to work with based on any diversity, and just explain it to them and say that it's not just you, it's your entire company, it's the entire school, and that's what happens. So I think that ensuring you have the support of your management to move forward being diverse, and then if you feel like it's right, wait until you see the student next, and outside the class, have a conversation with them. So they know that next time that happens, they won't be able to do that again, because that's not appropriate or allowed in the class.
Thank you. And moving on to another question, which sort of I think is encapsulated in both the talk and that answer. The question is, do you use these techniques which you outlined beautifully in your talk? Do you use these techniques to deal with all stereotypes students can bring to class?
So the bird theory is one for microaggressions, and the bird theory was a diversity non-specific microaggression theory. So yes, in that's what I was trying to achieve, in that even though these things are more LGBT focused, because it's like generic microaggression theory and it's general inclusion managerial practicality, you can use it for all different diversities. Absolutely.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Now, I love this question. This is one of those questions that's kind of like, might be quite, you know, when the mirror is up and you really start to reflect, it can be quite an uncomfortable place. But I think that's where we really do learning and reflecting. And I've been doing a huge amount of that over the last year. And I think that's helped this program come together. And I can see in the audience, there is a reason why I'm waffling on. I can see in the audience that we've got teachers, we've got school owners, we've got the whole lot. And I think, Charlotte, you know, given your work with St. Giles, you're brilliantly placed to answer this. So the question is from someone who's a teacher who is LGBTQ+, although students don't know this. And the question is, we've had a few LGBTQ+ students, and it's been tough when they come to me for help and advice. How can I better lobby my school for an LGBTQ+ advisor or diversity advisor? So I suppose that's the question also. So how can the teacher try and enact that sort of organizational change?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Because I myself wondered this for years. It took quite a few years before my very liberal school finally took up the initiative, or took up my bait, if you will, to have an LGBT representative. And what I did was I made it easy, I made it attractive, and I made it look like it was not look like, I made it clear that this was the choice that would benefit the school. So I tried to take it as much from a managerial mentality as I possibly could. So being honest, I did do a lot of work for free so that I could make my presentation to my principal. But if you want any of my materials, email me and you've just got the lot by all means. So I presented to my manager all of those materials. So he didn't have to think about it. It was just like, oh yeah, okay, you can go off and do that. Here's a board. And I made it very clear that on various British Council documents and CEFR documents and various official policies that we need to be inclusive within the school, but also made it clear that it would be in the linguistic benefit of the students, which it is, and also addressing more diverse narratives to a diverse range of students that we get isn't going to be a bad thing. That's the way the world's going. And actually now I would have said to him, not having an EDI policy or a representation in the gayest city in the country is just not on.
Right.
So that was how I did it.
Right, lovely, thank you. And there is a second part to that question. Well, actually the first part, but I've taken them in different order, which is more personal. So I hope that this is okay. But the person who asked that, so who's the LGBTQ plus teacher, has said, I always found it challenging to answer prejudiced questions objectively. Now, I can't speak to that. I'm not in the community, you know, I'm one of these white cis male, hi everybody, you know, yawn. But I'm really interested about listening to people who have experienced this. So can you offer any advice there? Because I can't imagine what it's like to have to deal with that in ways that I saw when I was teaching in an ELT classroom.
Answering prejudice questions is really, really difficult because they're laden, you know. So on one perspective, as a teacher, you want to just answer the question and you want to help, but you know that it's not just a question that's being asked, there's prejudice that's being brought forward. So you're kind of drawn in one direction, you want to pull back in the other direction, and it's really tough. And I don't think with that there is one objective thing that I could say you should do every time. I think that you should assess how you feel and assess what you feel like you can cope with doing that day. And if at that day you don't feel like you can move forward questioning prejudice beliefs, then by all means, just if you have one, point to the poster on the wall and say, that question seemed a little bit prejudiced, but with regards, so unfortunately, I don't feel like I can answer that in the classroom, and then just move on. Or just point and say nothing, and then afterwards address it with a student if you feel okay. Or give it time and then address it as a student. But know that there's no should involved, because all you can do is what you can do that day, and you shouldn't be pushing yourself to do anything. It has to be okay for you as it is for them. So I would say pre-plan what you would do in these situations. Give yourself a choice of 3 options, and then on the day be like, oh, I feel great, I can do that. Oh, I feel trash, I'll do something else.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Okay, we do have a bit of time for a couple more. So if you do have a question, now is your time to pop it in that Q&A box. I've got a question, Charlotte, if I may, because you referenced many resources, which I find really interesting, because I went to a talk at IATEFL many years ago, and it was about representation of these issues in course books. Now I'm talking about the big publishers who, it's a difficult one. We really appreciate their support, but I think this is a discussion which is still ongoing and worth having. It was Simon Denton who was talking about it, who I'd totally recommend following up if anyone's listening out for links and where to go. And he was looking at various editions of course books, and he felt that at that time there'd been a rollback actually in representation. I'm just wondering where you see things going in the materials that you use.
A very good question. So unfortunately, I think there has been a bit of a rollback in diversity of late. And I think that there are lots of threats to the TEFL industry at large. And especially with COVID, lots of difficult issues have arisen. And so people have arisen. And so people are very conscious of keeping profit and not upsetting target markets. But I think that with the rise this year of Black Lives Matter protests, equality with the Sarah Everard protests, everything I spoke about at the beginning, I think that avoiding those narratives is soon going to be more difficult than it ever was before. I have spoken to quite a few publishers, to be honest. And I remember last year speaking to publishers, I'd be like, guys, have you ever thought about a gay person? And it wasn't a thing. But I think that this year, everything seems to have just exploded and become so much more inclusive. So to be honest, as we speak, our materials aren't massively representative, and moving forward, I actually feel quite confident that they will be, because I don't think it's, I think that they will have to be. So I feel quite optimistic, actually.
Great.
It's naively so, but I hope not.
Okay, well, no, I think better to be naively optimistic than spend your life buried in pessimism, isn't it? Or at least that's how I try to approach things. Eleanor, stay muted. Don't tell them the truth. That's what I would say.
I would say, though, guys, I would say, if you are keen to get more diverse narratives into course books, write them letters, find them at conferences, talk to them. The more voices they hear, the more kind of teaching voices, they're like, we want more inclusive stuff, then they can only respond. It can't ever do any harm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we're up to time. So that's a fantastic session. Charlotte, I'm going to sort of break protocol slightly and ask, if possible, are you able to share the slide that has your email address on? Just because a few people have been asking for that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We get that up. It's just... Oh, Lady Gaga again.
Oh,
great. Can't have enough Gaga.
Everywhere, isn't she? She's everywhere. There we go, guys. And as I said, anything that you need any materials, just email me and I'll do my best at sending you everything. Even these slides. I'm not precious. I just want you guys to have it.
All right. And we can host the slides if you like. That's no problem on the site after the conference.
All
right. We've got to draw it to a close. So Charlotte, from me and the team, and I'm sure everyone in the room, I could see all the thanks coming in. Just thank you so much for a really important session that not only tackles those issues that are sometimes difficult to talk about, but really in a positive way of what people can do and how to act and what we can change. It's so difficult, but thanks so much for a positive presentation about that. I absolutely loved it. Thanks so much. No problem. Always welcome. And thanks so much to everyone for joining us. So we've got another session coming up and then our closing plenary. So again, wonderful to see you all here. Thank you so much for joining the event. I hope you're having a good day. We'll have more details and slides up on the site after the event, so look out for those. And with that, I'm going to stop waffling and bid you all farewell. So see you in the next couple of sessions and have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Tom. Bye.
Bye.